As you all know, because you're here, we're here to hear from a volunteer group of citizen scientists and monitors, Waadookawaad Amikwag, that since the end of Line 3 construction last fall has been actively monitoring the pipeline corridor. The route was built through northern so-called Minnesota, through Anishinaabe treaty land, crossing numerous bodies of water and wild rice beds. And that construction process has caused a significant impact to land and water, much, much more than the state has been reporting. The company that built it, Enbridge, has been reporting. So the group that has been doing that really careful monitoring work is going to share out some of their findings with you all today. So here's an overview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll have an opening from Victoria. All of our speakers today, aside from myself, are volunteers with Waadookawaad. And I should introduce myself. I'm realizing my name is Haze. I use she, they pronouns. I'm here today on behalf of the Northstar chapter of the Sierra Club, our local Sierra Club chapter. This Beyond Oil team is partnering with Waadookawaad to put this event on. I've been an organizer in Minnesota for many years and worked on the Line 3 pipeline fight. So that's me. Our program today will start with an opening and some grounding from Victoria, and then we will transition to Jeff, who's another volunteer with the team, talking about some of the background of this project, how it came to be, and why this work is so crucial. We'll have a video from another volunteer from the group, Jami, speaking about the promise of restoration that the state claims is ongoing and where we're seeing that fall short, some of the context on Waadookawaad's work. Another video from a volunteer, Jaci, out in the field, who has done a lot of scouting and monitoring of the pipeline corridor. And then two volunteers from Waadookawaad, Ron Turney and Laura Triplett, will talk about a few of the sites where we've seen some of the significant damage. There are dozens of places along the pipeline corridor where we're seeing damage to water and to land. They'll be focusing on a few at LaSalle Creek, Walker Brook, and Moose Lake. Some footage and video of what's happening there, and then some of the geology of what this means for the water, how the ecosystem is being impacted. Jeff will talk again a little bit about the barriers to taking action, the advocacy work that Waadookawaad Amikwag have done so far. And Ron will conclude by talking about the implications of what we've seen happen on Line 3 in Minnesota for other pipeline projects, including the Line 5 pipeline, proposed reroute and construction of that project through Wisconsin and Michigan. So Ron will be talking about what we've seen in Minnesota and why that leads us to believe that these projects should not be allowed to continue in other places. And a reminder that this evening we'll be having Q&A with the Waadookawaad Amikwag folks. Today's participation will be just listening and presenting. This evening we'll have a longer forum for question and answer with these volunteers talking about their experiences. So hold on to your questions from today. And if you're available to join us this evening, please do. Both events are being live streamed on Waadookawaad Amikwag's YouTube channel, so you can find these videos there after the fact. With that, I will turn it over to Victoria to really set the stage for the conversation we're going to have today. So I will turn it over to you, Victoria.
Buju and Dinaway Margana Duk, Jawani Mishig, Daga, Bangia to go and Nenata National Bin, Victoria McMillan, Indigenous cause, Jaganash Mung, Migiziquin, Indigenous cause, Jiboy Mung, Indigig, Kilimagom, and Moye Yes. Magizin in the day, Indigo Benesi, Anishinaabe, Equa in Dao, Baba Iganing and Dunjba, Nagachu, Nangish, Gornaganing and Da, Dago Widuko Shinum, Javanimshig, in Waywin Nungum, Migwich Bizindawig. I'm Victoria McMillan. I'm a first descendant to the Fond du Lac band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. I descend from all the treaties in the north that Anishinaabe have signed. I have family from Bad River, Red Cliff, Sault Ste. Marie, and others. Bands that way. As Anishinaabe, my duties are to stand for my people and my family and my clan, and to carry out those duties as best that I can for the next 7 generations, to ensure that our teachings and that the land and that our rights are ensured for the next 7 generations. At Waadookawaad Amikwag, we work hard to respect each other and to teach each other as much as we can, to respect the land and to be able to speak to the community in a way that they can hear and understand what is going on. we understand the various issues surrounding consultation and how it is hard for many people to get the consultation they need to understand what is happening with the pipeline. And so they asked me to do a prayer this morning, as whenever you're trying to do anything meaningful, that's how we start things. And so that was done this morning. And now we're going to move forward in a good way with an open mind. There's a lot of volunteer work going into this, just so that we can show the public in a simple way what is going on that is not being reported. Enbridge is a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar company probably, and they have the means to inform, and they have the means to do these things for us as community members. And we don't feel that that is happening. So we are doing the work to try to make sure that everyone is informed. So with that, Miigwech Bizendalieg, I hope we move forward with open minds and open hearts. Miigwech.
Thank you, Victoria. We'll turn it over to Jeff now to speak a little bit on the context of how this group came to be, the work that they've already done, to start us off with some of that history of the regulatory process that brought us to this point, some of his own personal journey. So I will turn it over to Jeff.
I'm Jeff Broberg. I'm a licensed professional geologist, and I've been interested in the science and culture of water for a long time. I've come to this line 3 over the last year, and let's have the next slide. I've learned some important lessons. As I was starting this, really working on the Clearbrook Aquifer breach, I wanted to consult with some native elders, and I had a really profound lesson on the origin story and how important water was to the Anishinaabe. And an important thing, the elder asked me, do you like the sound of water? And of course I do. And he made the point, he said, you know, we're all connected through that. These are songs and prayers, and everything hears it. The rocks, the animals, we all hear it the same. And it's something that connects us all. So that's how it started. And I thought back to my mother. My mom was born in Danbury, Wisconsin, near the Fond du Lac, and we had a lot of important Native friends, and we were taught something way back. Next slide. That water was the first medicine. Whenever I was a kid and was sick, my grandmother first gave me water. And it's indicative of that connection that we have here. So next slide. Today's purpose gets complicated, and we want to unravel that complication. We have construction damages that aren't apparent. They're hidden from public view in remote places. We're going to show you new looks at things that people have not seen yet outside of our group. And we want to show you the power of a partnership and the power of citizen science and people working in a common goal for advocacy to protect our water and seek that accountability. Let's have the next slide. This first started with water protectors and people going out on the site during the construction, like on the left, and watching the site, drone videos and actual on the ground holding space and looking at this and finding these large spots where the drilling mud was coming up to the surface on the right-hand side. Many months after the construction had been removed, we're still seeing upwelling mud in these areas, and that was our first concern. But it brought up an opportunity to do some high-tech science, things that I was familiar with, remote sensing, infrared photography. And it's an important tool because it measures the temperature of the ground. You can see the energy of the water. The temperature always comes out at 45 degrees from the ground. And then if the surrounding ground's frozen, you get a profile. If the surrounding is warm in the summer, you get a profile. And partners agreed to pay over $50,000 to fly the entire site, one end to the other, from 3,000 feet a swath a half a mile wide so that we could see the natural conditions and the disturbance of the pipeline. Next slide. And what we discovered during this, it took a while to evaluate all of this data. It was over 3 terabytes of data. Don't try this at home. We found 45 sites where we had emerging groundwater right on the pipeline. And yet only 3 of them were really being discussed. Let's have the next slide. Here's an image from a high view of what this looks like. The red spots in the upper left here are the aquifer breach and the water that they're disturbing from that aquifer breach at Clearbrook. And we can see the natural occurrences, the hot water upwelling in Deep Lake. So we're learning science about the area and what the damage is on the pipeline. So the thermal imaging is the right tool at the right time that allows us to see that energy of the earth. And we were able to use that to target our investigations. The next slide, please. In Waadookawaad Amikwag was formed, and this group of dedicated people said, let's get trained in the science and the collection, and let's go out to the site with our drones, and wherever it's accessible and we're not trespassing, let's find these sites. And we gave them GIS coordinates. And Jackie and Dawn and so many of the others went right out to those spots and saw what we could see from remote sensing and could document this and collect, make field notes and make observations of things like upwelling sinkholes in the middle of areas that are right on top of the pipeline. The next slide. We formed to witness this and to document the damage and discover the permanent damage on these 45 sites that cross all the way across Minnesota. You think of what this has done. It's a curtain of excavation and filling across the entire headwaters of the Laurentian Divide. The Red River, the north, the Mississippi, the St. Louis is all affected here. Next slide. And what we found is there's 3 types of damage that have occurred. There's deep excavations like had happened at Clearbrook. There were sheet pile installations where they piled those steel sheets down 30 feet that penetrated artesian aquifers that burst the water to the surface, and frac-outs. The next slide. And what we've done is put together partnerships. I looked back on my email today and saw that my first communication was September 28th, a year ago. In a year, Waadookawaad has put together a group of people focused on documenting what was not supposed to happen, was promised not to happen, frac-outs, low risks, permanent damage was not supposed to exist. This is a story of dedication while we wonder why the state isn't doing the work. Thank you, Haze.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Next, we are going to transition to a video of another volunteer from Waadookawaad, Jami, sharing a little bit more of the context about the group and their perspective. You'll see some more images from the monitoring work, some of the land, and their framing, right? It's amazing if true what the state has said about the monitoring and the rehabilitation, the restoration of this land, right? The narrative is the pipeline construction is over, the land is healing. That's what we've been told, right? That we can trust these agencies. That's not what Waadookawaad folks are seeing on the ground. So I'll turn it to Delaney to share that first video from Jami. And thanks everyone again for being patient as we navigate the wide world of Zoom tech.
Bonjour, Gakinawea, Jami Gaither, Indigenous, Nawi Nimbaginang in Dunjaba, Nawakwa, and Da Nungum, Besho Gawa Ba Biganikag, Minawa, Ishpim Manolman Zaga Gan, Minawa, Besho, Enbridge's Line 393, Chmukamanakwe and Dao. My name is Jami Gaither. I'm a Scandinavian European settler colonizer, originally from the Midwest, and today I live in the middle of the forest, near White Earth Reservation and Upper Rice Lake. My husband and I are abutters to the Line 93 project in the heart of the places we'll be talking about today. I stand on the shoulders of all who've taught me and who've prepared my way. I'm especially grateful to the people at Standing Rock who awakened my heart in a new way, and Nibe, water, inspiring me every day. This story we're hearing from A.G. Ellison, the DNR and the MPCA, along with Enbridge, that they're remediating the land, would be amazing if it were true. We've heard time and again from Enbridge that they've repaired their breach, only to hear months later that the breach is still flowing. We've heard comforting words from the DNR, while the MPCA claims their Frac-out investigation was reported with the settlements recently announced. I read the reports. There's nothing of the MPCA's confirmation of Enbridge's claims. It's simply a report on what Enbridge says happened with no evidence of MPCA boots on the ground. Where are the water testing results, the complete listing of chemicals the Canadian corporation left behind, and the pictures of the resulting devastation to the land and water? When we of Waadookawaad Amikwag look at the land, we touch her, talk with her, and ask her to tell us what is happening. We listen to the water, and we are guided to discoveries that the state has not managed to find. Surely if they had, we'd be seeing reports on the findings we're uncovering, because what we're seeing are more damages to our wetlands and bogs, more damages brought by the remediation. Saturday night, the lights were on at Walker Brook. Enbridge didn't do their geology homework when they planned to come across our 1855 and 1854 treaty lands. Many of us did our own homework and know this land intimately. We warned of the dangers and stressed our concerns to state and federal agencies, all to no avail. The state and feds didn't do their homework either, trusting too much in Enbridge's promises, and now we're all paying the price. What you see today is disturbing. It's not easy to witness, and we appreciate your courage to join us. We hope you will be inspired to action. One final note, our work is done legally, sampling on public lands and securing permission on private lands to assure our evidence is admissible in a court of law. With the help of citizens, perhaps we can urge the state and federal agencies to finally resort to listening to the people of the land, to come and see with their own eyes what Enbridge has done. We want remediation, not the fix with the most concrete, but the repair that experts determine is best for the land and water. And then we want these regulatory agencies to assure that we never let Enbridge do this anywhere else.
Thank you for that, Jami. Next, we're going to have a special different sort of video out from the field. Another volunteer, Jackie Christensen, has been routinely out in the field, taking water samples, canoeing in, snowshoeing into these very remote places where Enbridge thinks no one will catch them, to make sure that we bear witness to what's going on. And so this video from her will speak out from one of the most beautiful sites. Not that any are more beautiful than others, but a very beautiful place, sharing some of the story of what she's been finding and what it's like to go out to these places and take water samples as a citizen science monitor. So I will turn it over to you, Delaney, for that second video.
We're all volunteers. Waadookawaad Amikwag is all volunteers, and we are out here doing work because the state of Minnesota is not. We shouldn't have to be here. These are really crazy beautiful places. As you can see, it can be hard work in a couple different ways. Like, it's really challenging, physically hard work. A lot of times it's canoeing, a lot of times it's hiking through wetlands. What am I going to find today? Am I ready for this? And what we want to see is healing. Like, that's what we want to see in these spaces, is that the earth there's a healing process going on. But oftentimes that is not the case. The damage has been so severe, the trees ripped apart, the wetlands ripped apart, literally ripped in half, our peat layers ripped in half. And so it's making it really, really challenging, really difficult for recovery. We saw McGeezy circling over top of us, and the paddle, this late autumn day paddle was just, incredible, and a really beautiful way to connect to these incredible places. This work is really important because what we're finding is that, close to major roadways, there tends to be more effort to beautify these places, and so that the public, thinks that, oh, the pipeline is done and there's no issue. But the more remote places you get to, really, the greater the impacts, and also the greater that you see, physically see the impact in the land and the water. And a lot of other impacts. We see these erosion socks all over, we see silt fencing all over the place, and that really is inhibiting our animals from today we paddled to where the pipeline crosses a tributary to this lake. We took water samples, and that is really important because we're looking for differences maybe at the area of impact, and also upstream and downstream, looking for differences. Oftentimes now what we're seeing is aquifer breaches or upwellings, and in fact that's what we saw today. So the way our team works is that we have drone pilots, and they do a lot of scouting for us, and they identify places that may have issues. And then as a team, we really talk about those places and prioritize and try to get to as many of those as we can. And so we are documenting through photographs, through video, through the water samples, the data there. And then also we have some meters we use in the field, and we can gather data on conductivity and salinity and temperature, and that can tell us a lot about what's happening in a particular place. We go out on the ground and we confirm what we might be seeing from the air. We do a lot of photographs, we take a lot of video, and try to bring the story of the place post-construction, to bring that story, back to everybody else. So we have come to the end of an incredible day out in the field. We are hopeful that this information will be used, in a lot of different good ways, and we're really grateful for these places, and we protect them. That's what we do.
Thank you for that, Jackie. I'll just add, and we'll see a lot more imagery here shortly, but for folks that spent time along the pipeline route during active construction, where you see that silt fencing and all of the construction materials laying around, those photos were all captured within the past year, right? So all that abandoned construction infrastructure is stuff that is still out in places, or maybe intentionally placed as part of remediation. But those ecosystems are what they still look like right a year after construction, the summer after active construction. Those are not images from the during construction period. So just to imagine, right, what this land is still looking like. And to now show us in really striking relief, we're going to have some of the drone footage captured by Ron Turney, another volunteer with Waadookawaad Amikwag, and he'll be giving some voiceover narration explaining what you're looking at from one of the sites that is experiencing ongoing aquifer breaching. So we'll be looking at LaSalle Creek drone footage next with some of the narration from Ron, so you can understand what you're looking at.
Bonjour, Waadookawaad Amikwag presents Enbridge Line 3 and 93 environmental impacts. In this video, we're going to cover aquifer breaches at LaSalle Creek and related issues. So let's get into it. Waadookawaad Amikwag and partner organizations conducted a thermal flyover of the Enbridge Line 3 and 93 route last year, on November 27th and 28th. Our data shows Enbridge and Bar Engineering's corrective action plan failed to identify and miss many active seeps in the area. Their CAP identified 7 seeps, but ours shows 10 to 12 additional seeps not being addressed. In this image on the left here, you see 7 seeps identified in the corrective action plan by Enbridge and Bar Engineering. But on the right, our thermal data from November 27th and 28th shows 7 to 10 additional seeps that have been covered with fiber matting, not included in the corrective action plan. In this image, you see one of the seeps covered with fiber matting, still releasing 45 to 50 degree groundwater being run off into filter bags in the trees. Here's a thermal version of the previous image showing the fiber matting with the 45 and 50 degree groundwater emerging from the sides and pooling on top, along with the water running off into filter bags. Another issue at LaSalle Creek is there's only one weir installed to measure the flow of one seep, but we can show 7 to 10 additional seeps leaking water. Here you can see seep number 4, and there's a small flow from this one. We estimate 3 to 5 gallons a minute, or around 216,000 gallons per month. Since there's no weir box here, we asked how much water has really been released in the entire valley from all of these extra seeps. Another issue we see here at LaSalle Creek is the easement becoming too saturated. The additional 7 to 10 seeps have been releasing water for the past year and turned this into a safety hazard on public land. Here you see filter bags attached to the weir with excess grout running off downhill towards these bags, which are stacked 15 to 17 high with additional grout running downhill towards LaSalle Creek. It's been over 1 year since the completion of Enbridge's Line 3 93 replacement project. They're still trying to fix their failures at Walker Brook, LaSalle Valley, Fond du Lac, and many other locations we've been monitoring. Waadookawaad Amikwag and Muckwa Initiative will remain on the front lines, protecting our environment, clean water, and Minoman. Miigwech.
Thank you for that, Ron. I'm going to turn it over now to Laura Triplett, who is going to break down some of the geology to help us understand what this means when water is seeping out of the ground like that, what that means for the land, how we can understand that for folks that are maybe, not knowledgeable about aquifers and how they function as part of these ecosystems. So I will turn it over to Laura to share some of that context and to help us understand what we're looking at.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give Delaney a minute to get the slides up here. I'm a geologist. I'm a professor of geology at Gustavus Adolphus College in South Central Minnesota. I do this work separate from my institution as a pro bono scientist for this group. Great, thank you. So in the work that Jackie and Ron have been describing here, we're focusing on two of the kinds of damage. There are others. And what Ron was just showing you at LaSalle is in the first category here on the left. It's the puncturing of aquifers and other major disruptions to water connections and flow. The second category is drilling fluid blowouts, like what we witnessed in the Mississippi River just outside of Itasca State Park. And those have resulted in what's an undisclosed but undoubtedly massive amount of drilling fluid permanently emplaced into river floodplains. By the way, the state of Pennsylvania recently filed 48 criminal charges against a pipeline company there for underground drilling fluid releases like this. Minnesota didn't or maybe couldn't file any of their different state laws. Also make a mental note of this temporary bridge here you see over the Mississippi. I'll come back to how damaging those bridges might be in a bit. So next slide, please, Delaney. So back to LaSalle. What Ron showed you is a terrible tragedy and was entirely preventable. What happened is this here, you can see the brand new clear-cut corridor that Enbridge made along the top and left side of this photo, and the temporary road there too. If we peel back the land surface and this animation, can you go back, Delaney, can you go back one and try this again? Hopefully we'll be able to see, okay, the layers on the right there, you can see layers of sand and gravel and also silt and clay that have, the silt and clay kind of act as a cap. They act as a confining layer, and cold, or cap is under what we call a confined aquifer down below. Delaney, sorry, if you could go back up one slide. The animations are getting ahead of us a little bit. Back one more up. Thank you. Just leave it here for a minute. So you can see that on the right. Now, this is really sensitive wetlands. It's really hard, in fact, impossible to trench through. So what Enbridge needed to do was install metal sheet piling into the land to stabilize trench walls. Otherwise, the trench walls would collapse. As soon as they did that, though, they installed them about 30 feet deep. Their consultant in 2020 did say they shouldn't pound sheet piling more than 20 feet deep in this very sensitive, complicated geology, but they went to 30 feet. in my professional opinion, even 20 feet was going to be a reckless move. They punctured through that yellow silt and clay, and these gray rectangles are supposed to illustrate that sheet piling that was pounded in. When they did that, they punched through, and water then started erupting up to the surface. Now, there were originally some small natural springs along the valley walls, and actually it created some really cool little micro ecosystems. That was known before construction. But once construction happened, this amount of water, it's much more water, it's different temperature, it's different chemistry. It's going to change the nature of the wetlands here and potentially de-water the entire aquifer below. That could cause compaction, land sinking, could cause other wetlands to dry up. So that's where we're at. So this was sheet piling installed last year during construction. So if you could move forward, Delaney, on the slides, let's see how the animations work here. So they installed, their fix for this was to pound about 135 metal pipes into the ground and inject grout, tens of thousands of gallons of grout, basically concrete, into those pipes to try and plug those holes. It basically created about a 23-foot tall concrete wall underground here, about the length of 2.5 football fields, that would act as an underground dam and keep groundwater from moving down the valley wall into the creek. That is happening in some of those images that Ron was showing you. We can see evidence that that is indeed happening now. But even with all of this grout, the fix didn't work. What's scary is water still seeping up to the surface now. And also what's scary is that Enbridge didn't tell the state of Minnesota that this was happening until July of 2022. Well, we at Waadookawaad Amikwag had known it months earlier from the work we've been doing. So I said that LaSalle is a terrible tragedy. Why is it terrible? This is literally the beginning of the Mississippi River. And beginnings are important. Things that happen in headwaters like this, changes that happen to streams, can have a cascade effect, a domino effect all the way downstream. And I've learned from my partners in this work that these places have value in and of themselves. The way I see my partners greeting these streams as relatives is a good analog. I think it's actually a more human analog for exactly what Western science has been trying to teach us anyway, that our lives and our livelihoods are bound up in the integrity of the water and the land. Lastly, this outcome was knowable and indeed known in some aspects. And these are examples of permanent impacts from normal construction activities, not temporary as was assumed during the permitting process. Okay, so now we're gonna go, oh, one more, if you could go forward one more slide, Delaney. So we're gonna go back to Ron in a second here. He's gonna show you another location that we've been monitoring. The state has not talked about this other site publicly yet. And this site, Walker Brook, was not included in the recent so-called comprehensive enforcement action. So Walker Brook is just a few miles from LaSalle Valley, as you can see on this map. You can see Lake Itasca down there on the bottom, the official headwaters of the Mississippi, very popular state park in the state of Minnesota. Now, the state didn't make Enbridge study the geology in Walker Brook before approving the route or starting construction. So we know a lot less about it. As far as I can tell, Enbridge didn't really do any geotechnical work to speak of. But I can tell you that it certainly has very similar geology. It's in a deep valley like LaSalle. It's full of complicated layers of glacial sediments and post-glacial sediments. It's full of interconnected wetland ecosystems like LaSalle. But this is really cool. This is actually in a completely different watershed. And I didn't draw it on here, but kind of striking from the southwest to the northeast through this, there's a continental divide, the Laurentian divide. so that LaSalle and the Mississippi flow, as you know, south toward the Gulf of Mexico, but Walker Brook actually heads toward the Red River of the North and Hudson Bay. And I hope that if you can come to the evening session tonight, Victoria is going to talk more about that triple divide that we have that makes Minnesota really special and indeed sacred to a lot of Native peoples in this country. So Walker Brook, I'm going to turn it back over to Ron so we can see that video of Walker Brook.
Boozhoo, Waadookawaad Amikwag presents Enbridge Line 393, Environmental Impacts. In this video we cover groundwater issues at Walker Brook. So let's get into it. As you may know, Waadookawaad Amikwag and partner organizations performed a thermal flyover of the Enbridge Line 3 and 93 reroute project on November 27th and 28th of last year. Top of the screen, you can see a utility corridor, and in the center of the screen, you see the Enbridge Line 93 pipe with oil flowing through it. But you also see a bright white signatures indicative of emerging groundwater with 3 seeps on the west hill and multiple seeps on the east hill. There's a sinkhole and seep directly above the pipe in multiple locations, and you have tubing running off the groundwater into filter bags, and the white that you see in the image is 45 to 50 degree groundwater. Here on April 1st, you can see 20 structures on the hillside trying to save it from eroding away from emerging groundwater rushing downhill into Walker Brook. In this video on August 1st, you can see on the west bank 3 seeps of groundwater emerging and being run off into filter bags. The dark indicates 45 to 50 degree groundwater. The estimated flow at this location is 10 to 30 gallons a minute, nearly 1 million gallons per month. In this thermal video, you see the yellow signatures as the gray fabric acting as a thermal barrier. On August 10th, you see the main seat covered with gray fabric with tubing transporting cold water over into filter bags in the woods. And you also see the seeps and sinkholes forming directly above the active pipeline. This thermal image shows the main seep covered in gray fabric, and the dark spots are cold groundwater emerging downhill. Here on September 15th, you can see the main seep surrounded by timber matting as a new work area emerges with boring remnants at the top left and water still being transported off to the bottom right. Here on October 24th, you can still see groundwater emerging from the 3 seeps on the west side. One estimate is 50 to 60 gallons per minute is still being released daily from this location, which is around 2 million gallons per month for the past year. It's 24 million gallons of water. It's been over 1 year since the completion of Enbridge's Line 3 93 replacement project, and they're still trying to fix their failures at Walker Brook, LaSalle Valley, Fond du Lac, and many other locations we've been monitoring. This is what happens when federal and state agencies fail to honor Indigenous treaties, conduct thorough environmental impact studies, listen to real science, and allow a foreign corporation like Enbridge to run roughshod in our most fragile ecosystems. Waadookawaad Amikwag and Muckwa Initiative will remain on the front lines, protecting our environment, clean water, and Minoman. Miigwech.
Great. Okay, so Walker Brook is an example of a site that wasn't included in the state's recent comprehensive enforcement action, and again, hasn't been discussed publicly. So Enbridge, as far as we know, did no geotechnical assessment here before construction, and it wasn't required. In my professional opinion, and actually what I recommended before construction started in testimony, was that there should have been multiple soil borings and at least 1 year of continuous groundwater monitoring here before a route should have been approved through the valley. This was also the lack of geotechnical knowledge. It's also the reason why there was that terrible aquifer breach on the border of the Fond du Lac Reservation. Just by the way, it's the same issue. They didn't do enough science beforehand to know what the situation was. It still could have been anticipated because I did, but anyway. Next slide, please. Delaney, thank you. So on the left here, we can see it's just Google Earth of Walker Brook on the left. On the right is the same image with the National Wetlands Inventory overlaid on that. This route crossed through what is very difficult terrain for pipeline construction, and what is also very delicate and not restorable from an ecosystem perspective, peat bogs. Peat bogs take thousands of years to form typically, but in an afternoon can be wrecked by this kind of construction. Now, because less is known about the specific sediment layers at Walker Brook, and because the agencies haven't yet responded to my request to see what they do know, I actually can't give you a detailed technical analysis of this site yet. What I can be sure of is that groundwater, as Ron said, is continuously bubbling out to the surface at multiple discrete spots on both sides of the valley. That water is 45 degrees, we know from on-site confirmation, indicating that the water is from at least 8 to 10 feet deep in the ground, possibly deeper. So I hope that Enbridge or the state or somebody is studying whether Enbridge has breached another confined aquifer here, or whether this is instead some kind of soil piping effect that construction caused that is concentrating upwelling water and destabilizing these hillsides. This to me is critically important to understand what happened here before any other pipelines are approved in the United States. We need to know what happened. And we had also hoped that they would do an in-depth study of the hydrology before allowing Enbridge to try and quote unquote fix this site. But as Jami's video said earlier last weekend, there was heavy equipment moving in and out of the construction zone 24/7 on a Saturday night. So we figure they must be doing something major, but I don't actually know what they're doing. Is this an aquifer breach? It looks like part of my slide might have gotten cut off. I was trying to highlight the information we have. We can see water bubbling up under artesian conditions. We can see the cold temperature. We have water chemistry that we are still analyzing and understanding. Could you go to the next slide, please, Delaney? So one last thing, Enbridge, I need to finish up because I know we're running out of time. There's one other site that wasn't included in the enforcement action, but we want to show you a little bit. Could you go to the next slide, please, Delaney? This is Moose Lake, and like on the top is the thermal imagery again. The white dots are groundwater upwelling, and on the bottom Google Earth image is where we've done some on-site confirmation. Notice here, so I know these points look really small, but if you've ever like pricked a water balloon with a pin, you know that water can come out of a small hole pretty fast. A lot of water can drain quickly. The on-site confirmation, it looks to us like these are corners. Perhaps this is bridge footing from a temporary construction bridge that they might have built across this site. We don't know, or maybe it's a sheet piling issue again. Again, hopefully someone is studying this to see what caused these apparent punctures so that it can be avoided in future projects. Next slide, last slide. So as a scientist, the questions I'm left with after looking at these 3 case studies is we don't know how much water was drained away. They aren't measuring all of it as Ron showed, so we won't ever actually know. And I hope that someone's studying whether there are permanent impacts to these aquifers. Again, we don't know. These are complicated geologies up there. It would take actually quite a bit of effort to really understand these enough to protect them. And finally, as a scientist, I'd put a plea out there that any such future projects have in-depth geotechnical investigation and a year's worth of hydrologic monitoring at every stream and every wetland crossing before a route is approved, because otherwise we can literally never know. We will literally never know the extent of the damage here. because that baseline information wasn't collected. And so my lesson learned as a citizen is that, you know, hey, Minnesota, we were outmatched by this multi-billion-dollar company. It's my assessment that if we want to protect our water, our state agencies need probably more funding. Our state agencies need more independence. And we probably need stronger laws in our state for our agencies to enforce in order to do the protection we expect. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. We'll turn right over to Jeff to speak about some of the barriers to action that Waadookawaad Amikwag folks have faced in doing this work, right? The citizen scientist monitoring, and we'll move towards closing with some final words from Ron about how we can think about these impacts affecting future projects. So over to you, Jeff.
Thanks so much. The barriers that we're talking about are both physical barriers and metaphorical barriers. We see all kinds of barriers, a cement wall that goes almost half a mile across an aquifer and peat bog. We see silt fence by the hundreds of miles that prevent the frogs and the turtles and the small animals from moving through their natural environment that are all left behind. And the metaphorical part of this is that we see barriers to communication and effective communication. We don't understand why the state and other federal agencies aren't acting on this. So we're continuing our volunteer action. We're recording the permanent impacts, and we proposed a memorandum of agreement with the state that seeks to repair trust, share our knowledge, and eliminate the cultural barriers to communication. Next slide. The challenge is one of communication. It's an information overload. It's complex. It's competing messages. It's a matter of status, cultural status, and lack of trust. Our response is to show up. We have a dedicated group of volunteers that are showing up and saying, what do we need to do to show and make the public and the state aware of these promised conditions have been violated. There was to be no damage. Next slide. There was not to be any permanent issues. And we were assured that to be true. It wasn't. So where can we find trust? Our water connections are broken and we're all suffering. Next slide. There's been 3 civil settlements so far, one for Brook, one for LaSalle, and one for Fond du Lac for the aquifer ruptures. Fines, settlement stipulations were ordered, and also all of those said that there would be no further action by the state of Minnesota. That doesn't mean that we won't take action, because the escape clause is that if new information comes forward that these are bigger problems, new problems occur, or they find that Enbridge and their consultants were dishonest, these can be reopened. We have criminal charges pending in Clearwater County against Enbridge. It's the same condition. They have a year to prove that they tell the truth. We want to challenge that, and we think they're not telling the whole story, and they're taking advantage of some of the physical barriers we have to understanding these things. So we're moving ahead, new information, and we aren't going to allow them to continue to conceal these. Next slide. So we have proposed back in the end of August, a really kind of complicated 6-page memorandum of agreement. And the principle is do no more harm. We want to get together on this, but let's stop the harm. And we're seeing many of the workings of this summer that are investigation or restoration are causing continued trouble. We need to continue thermal investigations. They're such an extraordinary tool. It's easy to do from drones. We can identify these sites that are problems. And we need a complete failure analysis that identifies all of these problems across the headwaters before they move ahead with line 5. They could repeat these same mistakes if we aren't diligent about controlling this. So the MOA has been sent. Next slide. We haven't heard back. We've sent it to the PCA commissioner, the DNR commissioner, the governor. Keith Ellison. Who's going to respond? Next slide. We're hopeful, but we've taken another track and gone down a federal approach. And we've asked our congressional delegation, and Betty McCollum has written letters now to the Corps of Engineers and the US EPA to address our concerns. We're waiting to hear back. Next slide. Who will respond? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I know we're coming right up on the top of the hour here. And I think for the sake of time, we'll conclude this first event today. And we will give Ron some of that space at the evening panel to especially focus on the connections to line 5, although I know many of our speakers mentioned it throughout, right? Given what we saw in line 3, these other pipeline projects absolutely should not be allowed to continue. So with that, we'll conclude. I would remind everyone that we're hosting the secondary event this evening at 7 o'clock for further discussion. And I'll also share here in the chat the YouTube channel from Waadookawaad Amikwag, where you can learn more, follow their information and their updates. And additionally, the Sierra Club will be sending out a follow-up email to all of you who RSVP'd to attend today with some further resources and places to stay engaged. So please continue to stay engaged with this issue, to support the work that folks are doing, and join us this evening at 7 Central if you can for Q&A and some more discussion with the panelists that you heard from today and others from that group. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a good day.